In this demonstration, you learn how to handle the scenario when another user has deleted an entity that you try to save with Entity Framework. After we are done with this scenario, we try to move the exception handling code that we have written to the DetailViewModel base class. So now let's see what happens when another user has deleted an entity that you try to save. Here I've opened the Friend Organizer solution. Now let's start the Friend Organizer UI project and let's create a new friend that I call Brian. I save this friend and I move the application to the left side of my screen. I go to the Solution Explorer, I right-click the Friend Organizer UI project and I start a new instance of the application and I move this instance to the right side. I open up the friend Brian also in this second instance on the right side. On the left side, I delete the friend Brian and I click OK. Now Brian is deleted from the database, but he is still open on the right side. On the right side, I'm a user that does not know that Brian has been deleted. I just enter a last name for him. When I try to save, I see the message box that we display in the catch block for the DB update concurrency exception. But as the entity is deleted, we can't save these changes and we also can't reload the entity from the database. So when I click OK, for example, we get an exception in our friend detail view model. System argument null exception, value cannot be null. This exception occurs because the getDatabaseValues method of the DB entity entry returns null as there are no database values anymore. Of course, there are no database values anymore as the entity has been deleted. This means that the value null is passed to this setValues method, which throws the argument null exception. So if the entity has been deleted in the meantime, this code in the catch block makes no sense. We can't save the changes and we can't reload the entity from the database. Instead, we should tell the user that another user has deleted the entity and he can't save it anymore. To do this, I stop the application and I paste a little snippet that I have already prepared. Here you can see I used the single method on the entries property of the DB update concurrency exception to get the DB entity entry. On the DB entity entry, I call the getDatabaseValues method to get the values from the database. If the database values are null, I know that the entity has been deleted in the meantime. So I show an info dialog to the user by using the message dialog service with the message "the entity has been deleted by another user." Then I call the raise detail deleted events with the ID of the friend. This will raise the after detail deleted events that is used by the navigation to refresh the navigation. So the friend will disappear from the navigation. With the return statement, I jump out of this onSaveExecute method of the friend detail view model. Now let's see how this works. Let's run the application. I create again a new friend that I call Brian and I save that friend. And I move the application to the left side of my screen. I start another instance of the Friend Organizer application and I move it to the right side of my screen. Here I open up the friend Brian as well. In the left application, I delete the friend, and in the right application, I enter the last name Lagunas. Now I click Save, and you can see the entity has been deleted by another user. When I click OK, the tab will be closed and the friend will disappear from the navigation because we are raising the after detail deleted event. Now I click it, and you see Brian is gone. Now let's look at another scenario. The user on the left side deletes the friend Julia Huber. On the right side, I have her still in my navigation. So when I click on Julia, I get an exception in the onOpenDetailView method of the main view model. You see, we get an invalid operation exception, sequence contains no elements, when we call the loadAsync method of the DetailView model. We pass in the ID that we want to load, but this ID doesn't exist in the database anymore. That's the reason why we get this exception. So now let's stop this application and let's put a try catch block around this loadAsync call here. I have prepared a catch block already that I used to display an info dialog to the user. If we get an exception here, I tell the user could not load the entity, maybe it was deleted in the meantime by another user. The navigation is refreshed for you. Then I call the loadAsync method of the navigation view model to reload the items in the navigation. Finally, I use the return keyword to jump out of this onOpenDetailView method. Because I don't want to add the DetailView model to the DetailView model's property, And I also don't want to set it as a selected detail view model, as we know the entity doesn't exist anymore. Now let's see this in action and let's start the application. I go to the Create New Friend menu and I create a new friend that I call again Julia Huber. I click Save and I move this application to the left side of my screen. Now I start another instance of the Friend Organizer application. On the right side, I don't open up Julia Huber, but on the left side, I delete this friend. Now Julia Huber doesn't exist anymore in the database. Let's see what happens when I click on her in the navigation of the Friend Organizer application on the right side. Now you see we get this message box, could not load the entity, maybe it was deleted in the meantime by another user. The navigation is refreshed for you. Okay. And now she disappeared from the navigation. So we are done with the scenario when another user has deleted an entity. Now let's see how we can refactor this code in the onSaveExecute method of our friend detail view model to the detail view model base class. Here you can see the onSaveExecute method of the friend detail view model. In this method we handle the DB update concurrency exception, and we have implemented quite some logic inside of this catch block. So here we have, for example, the logic for the scenario client wins, and here the logic for the scenario database wins. Now let's assume you want to implement optimistic concurrency also for meetings, then you have to redo all of this in the meeting detail view model. But redoing the same stuff is a bad idea. So let's try to move this logic with the DB update concurrency exception to the detail view model base class. So I just collapsed this onSaveExecute method, and I select it, and I press Ctrl C to copy it. Now let's go to the detail view model base class. I scroll down in this class, and at the bottom I paste the onSaveExecute method. I remove the override keyword from this method, and I change the return type to task, and I rename the method to save with optimistic concurrency async. For the DB update concurrency exception, we need a using directive for system data entity infrastructure. Then we call here the single method on the entries property of the DB update concurrency exception, and for this single method we need a using directive for system link. In the try block we are using the friend repository and its save async method. The friend repository is specific to the friend detail view model, so we need to get out this dependency of our save with optimistic concurrency async method. So I just add a parameter here of type func that returns a task like the save async method of the friend repository, and I call this parameter savefunc. I press Ctrl dot to add a using for the system namespace that contains this func delegate. Now I replace the save async call on the friend repository with our savefunc. I scroll a bit down, and here we use the friend repository again. So also here I used the savefunc. Then when I scroll down you can see here we use the friend property. Instead we can just use the ID property of our detail view model. At the end we have some logic that is specific to the friend detail view model. We have the friend repository, the friend property, and we also raise the after detail saved event with the first name and the last name. So we should replace this whole block with a method call that can be handled by a subclass. So I scroll up again, and I add another parameter to our save with optimistic concurrency async method. This time a parameter of type action, and I just call it after save action. I scroll down again and I replace these 3 lines with our after save action. Now we have no more errors in our detail view model base class, and we can go back to the friend detail view model, and we can just use our new method inside of the onSaveExecute method. So here I await the new save with optimistic concurrency async method, and I pass in the save async method of our friend repository. As a second parameter, I need to pass in an after save action, so I just use a lambda here with a little body. Now I can already remove this whole try catch block, and I have just the 3 lines left. I cut these 3 lines, I scroll up, and I paste them here into the lambda expression that is passed to the save with optimistic concurrency async method. Now this code looks very clean and it can be reused by other detail view models. Let's run the application and let's see if it still works. I press the Windows key and arrow left to move this instance to the left side, and I start another instance of the Friend Organizer UI project. And I move this instance to the right side. Now let's open up Erkan Egin in both applications, and on the left side I change Erkan to Chrissy. I click Save, and now Chrissy is saved in the database. So on the right side we have still the old entity. Now I change here the first name to Aleph, and I try to save this, and now we get the message box like before. I can click Cancel, and then I get the values from the database. So you see, everything works as before, but now we have refactored our logic to handle the DB update concurrency exception to the detail view model base class. Now let's wrap up what you have learned in this module. In this module, you learned how to use the timestamp attribute for optimistic concurrency with Entity Framework. You can set the timestamp attribute on a property of your entity that is of type byte array. Usually, you name this property row version. In the database, Entity Framework will create a column of type row version that is incremented with every update to the record. When Entity Framework is used to access the database, it will add the row version to the where condition of every update and delete statement. If a record with this row version is not found in the database anymore, Entity Framework will throw a DB update concurrency exception. You learned in this module how to handle the DB update concurrency exception, and you have also seen the two scenarios, client wins and database wins. Beside these two scenarios, you can also implement your custom logic with a mixture of both. So you can display, for example, a diff screen to the user that allows them to select the changes they want to store to the database. Now we are done with the logic in the Friend Organizer application. In the next module, we will style the application so that it looks a bit more modern. Welcome to the module Styling the Application. My name is Thomas Claudius Huber. In this module, you will learn how you can style the Friend Organizer application that we have built in this course. The Friend Organizer application has the default look that comes with WPF. You will learn how to adjust the application so that it gets a dark and modern user interface. Before we start, let's take a look at the module outline. At the beginning of this module, I will show you what the final application should look like, so that you know what we will build. After you have a clear picture what we want to do, I will show you the ways how you can style your WPF application. Then you will style the Friend Organizer application with the MAAPS Metro library. MAAPS Metro is an open source library that is used to style the standard controls of a WPF application. You will learn how to add this open source library to the Friend Organizer application. You will also learn how to use its base styles and its Metro window. And I will show you how you can style the navigation and the tab headers of the Friend Organizer application. But this is not everything. I will also show you how you can adjust the font sizes and the colors in the Friend Organizer app, and you will learn how to use the MAAPS message dialog instead of the standard message box that looks a bit old school. At the end of this module, you have created a dark and modern Friend Organizer application. Now let's start and let me show you what the final application should look like. In this demonstration, I will show you what the current Friend Organizer application looks like, and I will also show you what the final application should look like at the end of this module. So let's switch over to my desktop. Here I've opened the Friend Organizer application like you and I built it throughout this course. Let's open up two friends here, and you can see they are opened up in tabs. All the controls that you can see here, like the text boxes, this favorite language combo box, the buttons, they have the default look that comes with WPF. When I click the delete button here, we can see a message box which also looks a bit old school. Now let me show you what the application will look like at the end of this module. Here you see the Friend Organizer application, how it will look like at the end of this module. I also open up the same two friends like we did before. Now you can see we have a dark and modern user interface. For the styling of this user interface, the MAAPS Metro library was used. You can see we have dark text boxes, the combo box is also dark, the buttons are styled with round corners, and even the title bar of the window is now styled and it's a custom title bar. When I click the delete button here, we see a custom message dialog that comes also with the MARUPS Metro library. Now I can click OK or cancel in this custom dialog.